Okay, sorry. Now I realize that picture is kind of blurry from here, but that's okay. Um, I would love if everyone could put in the chat where they live, on whose land they live. For example, I live in Santa Cruz Mountains, which is Amamutsan territory. So if you could put in the chat which territory you live in, that would be awesome. I'm not going to read the land acknowledgement, the Muwekma land acknowledgement. San Jose State sits on Muwekma territory because it's being read at most of the events. Instead, I'll kind of just talk for about maybe 1 minute about land acknowledgements. So working on land that is unceded territory of Muwekma, as I do, but also if folks that work at De Anza, UC Berkeley, Santa Clara University, Stanford University, all sit on unceded territory of Muwekma. And I can put their website, Muwekma's website, in the chat in a minute, so you can look at their website. What is a land acknowledgement, I think, is important to think about, and what work does it do, right? Is it useful? And I honestly have mixed feelings about land acknowledgements. I think we should all know on whose land we stand. But what beyond that, does it actually do work? Many Native people have criticized land acknowledgements. So I'll give you a couple examples. Cutcha Rising Baldly's series of talks entitled, "Thanks for coming, now give the land back." And she says that decolonization is giving land back. So if you want to decolonize, why don't you give some of that land back that you have? Greg Castro, another Native scholar, says that land acknowledgements are often more of a business transaction. And as Howie Echohawk notes in his article, "Fuck Your Land Acknowledgement," he states that what I have seen is a bunch of mostly white liberals trying their best to make themselves feel better. And he continues by saying, "Will this land acknowledgement get our land back? I'm watching, I'm waiting, we all are." So I think it's important to think about what kinds of services we have for Native students, what kind of resources we provide to Native students, what work do we actually do on our campus, rather than just acknowledging the land of Muwekma. Okay, and I'll hand it back to Miranda.
Thank you, Soma. And actually, I'll hand it off to Michael, who will introduce the meeting today.
Thanks, Miranda. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session at this inaugural Transforming Communities event here throughout the community. So today, we're first going to start with introductions, and then we will provide a background context to this research project that we have been working on as a team for the last couple of months, primarily focusing on the results from the focus group conversations. And then we hope at the end to really open this up to everybody to really engage with the findings and see how we all fit in this movement of racial equity, community safety, and public spending here in San Jose. Next. So with that said, we're going to introduce ourselves. And if you have not yet, if you're coming into this presentation, if you feel comfortable, please introduce yourself via the chat. But for ourselves, we are part of the San Jose State University Human Rights Institute. And for those who may not know, the Human Rights Institute is a university organizational research and training unit under the CSU system that specifically focuses on human rights research, journalism, and policy design. I myself am Michael Dow, and I am an assistant professor in the Department of Kinesiology. And I would like to turn it to Melissa, who is a colleague and a member of the team here.
Thanks so much, Michael. Melissa McClure Fuller, and I started this project actually as a graduate research assistant. I have since graduated and got my master's of public health, and now I work as a lecturer in the public health and recreation department here at San Jose State. And I will pass it on to Miranda.
I'm Miranda Worthen, and I'm faculty in public health and rec, and I'm also the research coordinator of the Human Rights Institute. And I will pass it to Soma.
Hi again. Soma, Assistant Professor of Sociology and Interdisciplinary Social Sciences.
I also want to mention here, if you're looking at the screen, that this is a collaboration with Sacred Heart Community Service, which is a community-based organization here in San Jose. And if anyone in the audience is from Sacred Heart, if you feel comfortable to unmute yourself and to introduce yourself, that would be awesome. If not, you can do that in the chat, but we'll give it 20 seconds or so for anyone who's here from Sacred Heart.
I don't think Derek or Chris
Yeah.
I don't think they're here right now. Bill, do you want to introduce yourself too, though? As the person who wrote the grant to get this work started.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Bill Armelin. I'm the director of the Human Rights Institute at San Jose State University. And I'm also a professor in sociology and interdisciplinary social sciences with my colleague Soma. I'm just super happy to be here. I'm really, really excited and proud of the work of our People's Budget team. They've been working incredibly hard with our partners at Sacred Heart, Rex and Surge and others. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone that's just put so much work and time into this project, for all the community members that took the time to participate in the focus groups, and all the students and community members who also helped us kind of get the word out and get folks coming to the groups. I'd also like to say thank you to all of you who are soliciting our People's Budget survey, which we might mention later. But again, I'm just really, really proud of the work this group's doing, and I'm hoping that we as an institute can continue to offer this kind of research to the community to inform our policies and reform moving forward.
Thanks, Bill. And as we move forward here, exactly what we're doing is to talk about this research collaboratory project known as the People's Budget of San Jose. So in lieu of that, I pass it on to Miranda to provide some context.
Okay, great. So the People's Budget Project grew out of kind of ongoing abolitionist movements in this country and elsewhere, and particularly the uprisings that began in the summer of 2020 and the social protests. And I would say the impetus to do this study was really the sense that San Jose is a pretty unique city. As one of the 10 largest cities in the country, its profile of the population is really different from any of the other large cities that are kind of at that level. We have a really large proportion of folks who were born outside the country. We have kind of racial and ethnic breakdown that is just very different from other large cities. And so we wanted to launch the People's Budget project, both as a research inquiry to really truly understand what people's experiences and perceptions about community safety are in this context locally, but also as an organizing tool around kind of building support and interest and awareness of alternatives to policing, and trying to build the capacity for that kind of collaborative effort across many different communities. And so this particular project is a collaboration between the HRI, the Human Rights Institute, and Sacred Heart. Oh yeah, let's definitely enable the live transcription. Thanks. So we started off thinking that it was going to be we'd survey people first, and then we would go ahead and do some focus groups and community events where we get feedback on the interpretation of the survey results. But pretty quickly on, we realized that it would be much more helpful if we started with focus group discussions. And so the Real Coalition that was collectively organized by a lot of the nonprofits, but led in part by Sacred Heart Community Services, helped provide feedback on some initial survey design. And then from that, we developed a focus group guide. Many different organizational partners contributed by hosting focus groups. Some of you may have either participated in or facilitated a focus group. And we'll talk about those methods in a few minutes. We then used those focus group conversations to redesign the survey, which was launched in August, and it's in 7 different languages. And if we have time at the end, which I'm sure we will, I'll show you a little bit of the results that are coming in on the survey, which is I find pretty exciting. So I want to pass it over to Melissa, who will tell us about the methods. And then we're going to go over the 3 main themes that Michael, Soma, Melissa, and I read as we were reading all the notes from the different focus groups. So that's the order we'll do it, is Melissa will fill us in on the methods, and then my 3 colleagues will go through each of those 3 themes, and then we'll step back and have conversation. I'd really encourage you, as you listen, if you want to use the chat actively to engage with what you're hearing, you know, whether things resonate with you, whether you are in a focus group and you're like, no, that's not what we meant, you know, like we want this to be a good conversation. So we'll have time for live conversation after the themes are presented, but feel free in the interim to use the chat actively to engage with this material as you're listening to it. Melissa.
Great, thanks, Miranda. Yeah, and I echo what Miranda said. If there's something that we're talking about that is a little unclear and you would like more clarification, please put that in the chat. That would be helpful as well. Okay, so when talking about data collection, Miranda mentioned that a focus group study discussion guide was created, and there were 2 pilot groups that were done to kind of try it out and see how it worked before we launched into the discussion group. So there were 12 focus groups. I believe there were 2 organizations that did more than one. They were all done over Zoom. Some of these groups were recorded, but all of them were transcribed somehow with a note taker. And so that's how the information, we were able to access the information. The other thing that was used were Jamboards, where if you haven't seen it before, it's like a giant bulletin board with sticky notes where you interact and you can put your thoughts and then it appears on the screen like little sticky notes. It's very colorful and fun to interact with. Where there were also 7 listening sessions that were done through REX, and REX is the Racial Equity and Community Safety Committee, which is part of Sacred Heart. We also had additional information from Michael and Soma. The information from Michael were conversations with the Vietnamese community in various different settings, and Soma did focus groups conducted with the Red Earth Women's Society about solutions around safety and violence against Native women. Our hope is that the findings of the People's Budget San Jose project will inform the new, and I'm reading this little box here if you want to follow along with me, the new Reimagining Public Safety Community Advisory Committee. This community advisory board is tasked with re-envisioning criminal justice and police reform in San Jose for their foreseeable future. If we move to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about some of the goals. So this is a summary of the goals of the focus groups. The first goal was that community members would have the opportunity to build relationships on the issue of community safety. So our hope was that through these focus groups, people would meet together and talk and find common ground or just listen to each other's ideas. Brainstorm with the community to understand what community safety means for them and their families. And then also assess the community support for divestment from the police and reinvestment in community safety alternatives. We go a lot more in depth into that later in the themes. And then educating the community around the way that the police, jails, prisons, courts, and other components of the criminal justice system are funded. And those are the summary of our goals. And we'll go to the next slide is, these are just some, there were quite a few questions in the facilitation guide, but this is kind of a little snapshot to kind of let you know what that process was like. So some of the questions were like, what does safety look like to you? Where do you feel safe now? And what people or relationships make you feel less safe or at risk of physical or emotional harm? So we looked at 2 different things, like what makes you feel more safe and what makes you feel less safe. And that was through the facilitation guide. And that's what a lot of the notes were taken on. We also did some videos, a facilitation where there were videos shown about people's examples of things that they felt added community safety and things that they wanted to see in their communities to help spur ideas and conversations within the focus groups. We also did discussions about the city budget and where people would like to see more of the city budget go, and also just providing education about our current city budget. This is a list of the focus group organizations that were part of our focus groups. A huge thank you to these organizations for the time and energy that it took to do this, and for the participants for sharing your personal stories and your opinions and your deep thoughts with us. It was really touching for all of us to read through all this information and just remembering that there are people behind all of these voices. We really thank you for that participation and the information that you shared with us. After we got this information, we'll go to the next slide. This information gave us kind of, I don't know, some leads into what the themes might be and what the findings are. So we really looked at that in terms of like, what are people saying? Are there common themes? And how are we going to interpret this information? So the way we did that is we were able to, Miranda's like intuitively just knowing when I want to click that button. We were able to divide this into 3 different themes. The first one being basic human rights for vulnerable populations. The second one, stop policing complex social problems. And the third one, which was racism, classism, and white supremacy, making communities less safe in San Jose. So the focus groups and the listening sessions provided an opportunity for the participants to share their ideas about these safe communities and the barriers. And so what we saw were a lot of feelings of frustration, helplessness, and sometimes anger. The information from these sessions was synthesized, and it was studied by Miranda, Michael, Soma, and myself. And these were the 3 themes that emerged relating to community safety. Soma, I'm going to hand it off to Soma. She is going to share our first theme. Soma?
Okay. So because I want to make sure we have time at the end, I may just maybe 8 minutes or 6 minutes, Miranda. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. So in all the focus groups, there was a recognition about the need to address basic human rights of our community members, particularly the community members that were most vulnerable, particularly our homeless folks struggling with mental health issues and addiction problems. Participants connected that desire to their safety. So the first part around housing was something that was mentioned in every focus group. And it was something that was central to all of the conversations. So even though some of the focus groups may have different political leanings than another focus group, all the focus groups mentioned that housing was a basic human right. And I will read these quotes, and this is just a representative sample of like some of the quotes from our work, or from the work that you all did in these focus groups. So they need to spend more on housing, and that is a safety net for everyone. Fresh lifelines for youth. Housing is a basic human right for living in a high-cost area, West Valley Community Services. And then money to build homes for the homeless, Peninsula Family Services. Next slide. And then to end it with this quote for the housing piece. But at the end of the day, housing is a basic need. And I think all these issues that our community members are facing would be solved because you're on the right track. Housing for everybody and safety for everybody would cause people to have less behaviors that are quote unquote dangerous. Black kitchen cabinet or Black leadership kitchen cabinet. Okay, next slide. Infrastructure was also mentioned by a lot of the groups. Participants felt safer when there was better lighting, when the streets were well maintained, and when they connected this to a part of their safety. So I'll read these quotes. 50 million to spend, super simple. Having lights on our streets, since some neighborhoods are very dark and can't see anything for lots of trees in the way. Fresh lifelines for youth. Clean streets that are fixed. Had to call 911 because my car was damaged. Black leadership kitchen cabinet. Okay, next slide. The last piece that was mentioned in this basic human rights area was mental health and other basic human rights. Mental health was also something that was mentioned in many of the focus groups. So it's why we wanted to kind of highlight that piece. I'll read some of the quotes. More mental health workers to help individuals with mental health drug issues. Peninsula Family Services. Wraparound mental health services needed, not just provisions of tiny homes. Guadalupe River Parkway Conservancy. Put money into helping homeless community members with mental health issues, race equity, and community safety. Security also is job security, Grail Family Services. So there were other issues that were mentioned in some of the groups. And then I am going to go to the Native specific. So in the groups that I did with Red Earth Women's Society, there were some similarities to how people felt about community safety, but there were also differences in that there was a recognition that Native people had some different needs, and they also wanted Native specific resources. So in particular, I'll read this quote, which kind of maybe will make it make sense to some folks that are not Native. I think particularly with Native people, and whether it be Native children, Native women, Native men, there is a trust issue, a lack of trust to other people, to outside people. And so I think getting as many Native women, and then she starts mentioning some folks that she knows, who can interact with Native people. There's a sense of trust there, So I think that that's an important piece that we saw, not just for Native groups, but for other groups as well, that people felt like they needed to be with folks that they recognized as part of their community to feel safe sometimes, right? And so we needed to support those processes and those spaces for community members. And Native people wanted Native specific resources. In San Francisco, we have the Friendship House, and looking at the possibility of what that would look like down here. So the Friendship House is a recovery center for Native people in San Francisco. When you can go to a center that understands your culture and understands who you are, you know the healing that does. Okay, and I think, am I on time? Okay, I'll hand it over to the next person.
Thanks, Soma. So I'm going to be talking about theme 2, which was Stop Policing Complex Social Problems. For this theme, we looked at how policing was viewed in terms of addressing social problems. And we recognized that there was often a perceived mismatch between the allocation of resources to the police and the impacts of police-driven solutions to these complex problems. Participants identified complex problems as the most important issue to achieve. Focus groups where there were primarily people of color or people who were currently or had been formerly economically vulnerable reported more negative experience with policing. And this was in terms of related things like homelessness and mental health. And focus groups that were primarily white and or wealthy did not share those experiences. However, what we did see was, despite these two different experiences across all social groups, there was a consistent feeling of helplessness and about how to respond to the complex social problems. And they also shared a certainty that police would not necessarily be the ones to address this problem appropriately. We go to, so our first theme, police cannot provide solutions to homelessness, mental health, and addiction problems. So when I'm talking about complex social problems, that's what I'm talking about. So participants did not feel like the police were the appropriate tool to address these issues. And many of the participants had either witnessed or personally had experiences with police interventions where they felt like the police caused more harm and did not offer solutions. Participants were often upset that people that were experiencing a mental health crisis or homelessness were often villainized, and they really were hoping for and wanting respectful solutions that addressed these core challenges. So if we read these quotes, and I I need to make it bigger on my end because I cannot I cannot read that one. The Rex listening said, I definitely think there should be more resources for mental health. Someone who is arrested is not necessarily for a crime, but an underlying issue of mental health, mental illness. And then our second one from Grail Family Services says, housing, like others have mentioned, what the community really needs. There are a lot of situations where you call the police and they can't even help you. So just that general feeling of frustration. And our second theme here, police lacking racial and cultural knowledge, appreciation, and training. So the tension between the desire for police to provide safety and the actual experience of police was something that was often mentioned. Often police were misinterpreting behavior as dangerous or violent for things that were maybe culturally appropriate, like speaking loudly or drinking heavily during celebrations or particular times. And there were negative interactions that often led to this general sense of fear or mistrust. It is also important to note that even within communities of color, there were different perspectives on police presence. One Latina participant noted that, quote, I come from a country where you see a lot of gangs and social delinquent groups, and the police presence makes me feel safer. Even within Michael's interviews with members of the Vietnamese community, there was discussion about profiling based on external appearances, in this case, visible tattoos, while other members of the same community felt an indifference towards policing. If we look at these two quotes, we can see that the first quote says, a heavy police presence in our neighborhoods and both the police actions in this neighborhood and the larger context make me view police as contributing to danger and risk of harm. If we go to the other quote, it says, participant one says, I can't go to the store because everywhere I turn, there are a lot of homeless people. Right now, I don't feel safe. I would like more security and more police patrol. Participant two, these are both from Grail Family Services, said, I agree with having more police patrol, but at the same time, it's hard because sometimes I feel the same with the cops around. I don't feel the same with the cops around. I feel less safe and I get scared. Okay, and then our third theme, which is about recommendations for non-police solutions. There were concerns repeated, and I said this over the course of these slides, that police could not address the complex problems. There was a desire for improved community safety. It was echoed in many voices. Some suggestions were solutions funded by shifting resources away from police to community organizations. And if we look at these themes, these quotes, we can see the Rex Listening Group said, personally, I don't think we need the police. I think they respond to crimes after they happen. So they don't really add safety to the community. I resort more to my neighbors and community as a source of safety. And then our next quote from Fly, which is Fresh Lifelines for Youth, put money on into a task force that are trained to assess drug abuse, mental health issues, or homelessness. And our final quote from Grail Family Services, I think we can give 20% to the police and the rest to other resources like community resources such as mental health. So this is a summary of our findings for theme 2. We're going to move on and look at theme 3 with Michael.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So this is theme 3, which is racism, classism, and white supremacy make communities less safe in San Jose. And within this last theme that came about in our analysis, there was a pretty stark relationship between the intersections of race, class, sometimes gender, and this sort of visceral feeling of white supremacy being a very much embedded nuance within institutions and sort of policies within San Jose. So overall, people's lived realities and experiences were impacted by their own identity and how they felt in specific spaces. But as we go on in this theme, we do want to say that there's a positive note of sort of recommendations and feelings and perceptions and experiences that were exacerbated by one's identity, that there were some sort of recommendations being made by communities to sort of pursue their own reasoning and their own method of community safety that does not involve law enforcement. So in this way, the first sub-theme will discuss the experience of many participants of color who are feeling unsafe in predominantly white spaces. In the second sub-theme, we discuss participants' interest in having greater social cohesion and opportunities for self-reliance within cultural groups. And then the third sub-theme, we discuss participants' desire for opportunities for cross-cultural connection. So we'll get to the first sub-theme here. So in this first sub-theme, participants described feeling unsafe in stores, neighborhoods, or sort of visibly white spaces, such as like Whole Foods, that were predominantly white. And this was often said by the discussions and the conversations that were predominantly filled with people of color. So having this regularly feeling unsafe walking in white spaces, or more broadly, where their culture was not taking into consideration within the mass. So if you're looking at the first quote here, I'm in a neighborhood that is predominantly white, so I have to find a community that is like me. I can't really breathe unless I am with people that I know understand my position, right? So that focused on this cultural understanding, this racial understanding that may not be really permeating in some spaces across San Jose here. In addition to that, particularly because of the current political climate that has been polarizing for both sides, many participants spoke to how symbols that may connect to white supremacy, such as the flag or anything else for that matter, can create uneasy feelings that because of past experiences are rising. So in the second quote here, we'll see, they have flags, so we don't feel safe as Latinos because we feel unsupported or not accepted. These people don't make us feel safe and secure, right? So again, there's really this visceral feeling that's coming out from the discussions and the conversations that were being had that sort of spoke to the experiences of people of color in predominantly white spaces. And we'll get to the second sub-theme, please. So in addition to this, when we're talking about community safety, there was this idea, this movement of sort of building social cohesion in communities of color. So for some, and especially discussions with people of color, safety was identified as something that communities, neighborhoods, or geographic spaces could build from within, not something that the police or law enforcement could specifically provide. So there was a strong sense and desire to create a safe community by people working together, right? So the people around you, the people who are living in the same spaces, in the same street, of having that and building that within and with each other. So specifically, participants thought that they could achieve community safety by cultivating genuine relationships with other members of their community and building a neighborhood where people were really looking out for each other. So that first quote here kind of speaks to that from the Black Leadership Kitchen Cabinet. The feeling of a village mentality is crucial, but something we've lost, ties to housing, safety, and all of it. So the fact that there are people that are being displaced who cannot afford housing has really exacerbated the cohesion, the connectivity, and the personal relationships that can be really built upon this. In this way, safety was seen as more of a relational process with other members of the community. Despite disparate experiences based on race, class, and gender, there was a consistent desire among the groups to have a safe and exclusive community where neighborhoods and neighbors supported each other. So kind of using an example from the YWCA, and the second quote, it looks like the community patrolling Chinatown, Oakland to help keep Asian elders safe. We take care of each other without needing the police department or another institution that might protect some of the community that would marginalize / threaten the safety of others. So here, as we're looking at solutions or recommendations of maybe where public spending can go, there is this feeling in some communities that if supported and given the opportunity and building relationships, we can have a strong relationship of safety. So this third sub-theme, in connecting to the second sub-theme, a desire for community and cross-cultural connection. In this last sub-theme, participants shared a yearning for connection across different groups within a particular neighborhood or geographic community. There were several specific suggestions for how to build these stronger social ties across cultural groups. So let's look at this first quote here. The farmer's market is a place where I can learn about other cultures through food and connection with others. It's a place where so many different people can come. I would like more spaces and places where we can make these kinds of connections with people from different cultures and where we can bond and talk with each other that will help us understand and trust each other, right? So words of trust and connection may really set a foundation for community safety that, once again, that may not require law enforcement and the resources that are permitted to law enforcement. So it was clear among many discussions that the trust and strong relationships were attributes people aspired in a safe community. So here in the second quote, bystander intervention, a safe community is free of the bystander effect. Community knowledge out of how to intervene. Trust that people will look out for you. Community, accountability, responsibility for other people. Community involvement will stop potential acts of violence, right? And again, this, as we're thinking about community safety, experiences of community, and combining those aspects, I think in this last theme, we're seeing people speak to how they would like to do that, that once again, that may not involve some of these extracurricular groups that have often come into spaces. So that is the third theme of the analysis that was conducted by the team here. And I'm going to pass it back to Miranda to kind of lead us into a discussion. You're muted.
There we go. I knew that. I saw that. I was like, okay, I'm muted. Trying to do too many things at the same time. So what I'd love to do is I'm going to actually stop the recording now. And I'd love to